Hello, Damien here at Slotcar. I have a Scalextric Dodge Challenger. I also have a challenge because I want to make this car as smooth and easy to drive and as fast as this Pioneer Camaro. Now the Camaro has had quite a bit of work done to it. It's basically had everything replaced: wheels, axles, gears, motor, guide, the whole lot. And it's a fantastic car. I really enjoy using it. This one here is basically standard. At one stage for the website I did an article and I did replace the wheels, axles and tyres from the standard Scalextric parts to Pioneer parts, just to give a better look to the car, so the tyres and wheels would fill the wheel arches a little better, and it did improve the looks, but it still isn't a particularly good handling car. I can get it around my track here at about 8.38 seconds is the best lap, and it's had its tyres through, but it's just not a particularly smooth car. It's got a high centre of gravity, it's quite heavy, and it needs a lot of work to make it really good. So it's a bit of a handful on track, whereas the Camaro is not. So the Camaro I can do a lap in just under 7 seconds, 6.98 I did just before, or 6.97. And this one, like I said, 8.38 was the best I could do. So follow me with these videos and we'll do a bit of work on this and let's see exactly how good we can make it. Okay, I've got the whole thing stripped out in pieces here, so let's have a good look and see what we've got, see what work we're going to do. Got the body off the car, here's the chassis. Now, one of the main things with this particular build is that the chassis goes all the way back to where the rear bumper fits and where the front bumper fits. We'll have a look at it here on the body. So for us to get some body flow, we're actually going to need to cut off behind the screw holes here and in front of the screw holes here, and we're going to take those pieces of chassis and we're going to glue them into the body with the bumpers and everything, and that'll give us the ability to have some body flow so that the chassis will be able to rock and move within the body. And just the fact that the body can move like that, it's going to alleviate some of the energy in corners and help make it a little bit smoother in the corners and help ultimately keep it on track. We're also going to need to grind off the sides of the chassis where it meets into the body here. We'll probably grind away a little bit of the bottom of the interior to make sure nothing sticks. We'll do a few things like that and we'll go through that at the time. Now here's the old motor. This is the original Scalextric motor. We're going to get rid of that. We're going to replace it with this one. This is the NSR Shark, and it's a 20,000 RPM motor. It's a motor that's not especially fast, but it's very powerful. It's got a lot of torque for a 20k motor, and it's the same motor that we've got on the Camaro. So we're going to use this motor so that we're comparing apples with apples when we get these cars on track together. We've got the axle here for the rear with the NSR 38 tooth sidewinder gear on it. So this is what we're going to use, and the rear and front axles here that we originally had, they're gone. On the rear axle we've got these magnesium advanced slot rims I'm going to use, and on the front we've got some aluminium advanced slot rims that I'm going to use. Now I'm going to use the original wheels to make inserts to go into the aluminium wheels so it all looks original. Now one of the other things we're going to do, apart from putting these bronze bushes on the axle, one of the other things we're going to do is we're going to fit a proper racing guide to this chassis. And to do that we're going to use this adapter. This is a B-Nova adapter, and it fits into the Scalextric chassis so that a aftermarket guide will fit. Let's make sure that the hole is the right diameter for the guide shaft so that we can mount it properly in there. So now that we've had a look at the parts, it's time to make start on some of this work. One of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the chassis and take this rear section and the front section out. Now I've just made a little mark on there with pencil that the camera might be able to pick up, and I've made that mark so that it comes in through here and through here, leaving some of the outside material to glue into the rear of the body. And I'm going to go just behind the screw holes, and I'm going to try and leave in the part where the rear bumper locates into the back of the chassis, so that that can all still be glued in securely. Now there's also these two little supports on here, one either side, that would have been used if lights were fitted to the car, and I'm going to chop those right out because I'm not going to need those at all, which will make it easier to cut through there as well. So let's just see if we can take those off first. One of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the chassis and take this rear section and the front section out. Now I've just made a little mark on there with pencil that the camera might be able to pick up, and I've made that mark so that it comes in through here and through here, leaving some of the outside material to glue into the rear of the body. And I'm going to go just behind the screw holes, and I'm going to try and leave in the part where the rear bumper locates into the back of the chassis, so that that can all still be glued in securely. Now there's also these two little supports on here, one either side, that would have been used if lights were fitted to the car, and I'm going to chop those right out because I'm not going to need those at all, which will make it easier to cut through there as well. So let's just see if we can take those off first. Okay, get those out of the way. And I'm just going to file the little stump down that I've made there as well, so that's nice and neat. Okay, now we'll start cutting and following my pencil marks and start cutting through this back end of the chassis. Try and make it as neat as possible, obviously. Not always my forte, unfortunately, but we'll do the best we can. There. Now that we've got this rear piece separated and we can see where the bumper fits into it there, I'm going to glue this all together into one piece to make it easier to mount into the body. Now the glue I'm using is Slow Zap. This is a slow setting CA glue, and I like this because if you put it in place, it gives you a little bit of time to work with it and make sure everything is sitting exactly where you want it. So we'll get that in place and we'll hold it there for a while till it sets. To fit this back panel into the body, I'm going to initially use some super glue around the edges to hold it in place, and then we'll put some araldite on the inside to really make sure that it's nice and firm and solid. So everywhere that it's going to touch to fit, we'll put some glue, and hopefully that'll hold it nice and firmly until we can get the araldite in there to strengthen it up. I'm going to drip a little bit of super glue onto this, onto the end of the skewer, so that I can get the glue exactly where I want it. Just to make sure that these rear panels go where I want, just want a little bit of glue on the edge there, and I'll hold that in place till it sets, and I'll repeat the process on the other side. So where I need to get the epoxy is down here between the joint of the rear panel that we're glued in and the body itself. Just a little bead of it on each side. Now at the front of the chassis I've also made some pencil marks where I'm going to cut through in front of the screw holes there, and I'm basically just going to repeat the process that I did on the back of the chassis on the front. Now while I've got the glue drying on the body, I'm going to take my Dremel and I'm going to start cutting the chassis sides down to give us body float. I find when I do this, if I make very light smooth passes, I get a much better job. Rather than trying to focus on one area and move slowly, I go very lightly and try and do one pass at a time. With this particular model, the chassis and the body fit quite tightly together. So I'm going to need to take quite a bit of material off these chassis rail sides to make them fit properly. And I think that's something probably best left till later on, till we've got all the other work done, just to make sure that we get the right amount there. And I also might be reducing these body posts inside by a little bit of by some of their height to drop the body down a bit lower to improve the centre of gravity. So we'll probably leave that till the end. Because we're not going to be using this DPR plug inside, I'm going to use my knife here and I'm just going to tweak and whip that plug bit off. So now while we're waiting for the glue to dry, I'm going to do another couple of small jobs on the chassis. I've got a diamond burr bit here as part of a bushing alignment kit, and I've used this just to take a little bit of material out of the inside of the motor mounts, and I've done that so that when we put the motor in, it won't flex or distort the chassis at all. And because I'm going to be gluing the motor in, it'll still be nice and secure once we're done. And I'm also going to be gluing the bushings in for the axle, and so with this diamond burr bit I'm just working it very gently into those bushing mounts to open them up a little bit so that I can get the bushes perfectly aligned whilst I glue them in. It's a slow job, it requires a little bit of patience, and it's good to have a steady hand. Just keep the tool straight and level and slowly work it through to open that up just a little bit. There, I've just got to the point that I've just got through. Just open that up. Now I've just popped the bushes in, and the part that I've got through here is from the alignment kit. This is not the axle, this is a pin gauge, and it's only very slightly larger diameter than the axle. So what this will tell me, just by feel, is if the axles are in place properly and aligned correctly. And once I feel that they're free and that the pin gauge is moving freely in there and that the bushes are exactly in the right place, I'll be able to lock those down with a bit of glue. But first I'm going to glue the motor in so that when it flexes into the chassis it doesn't misalign the bushes either. Now that I've got the bushings perfectly aligned, a little drop of super glue will keep them in place. Careful of course not to actually put it on the bush itself, careful not to put it on the rotating part of the bush, just on the top of the bush, and it will just with capillary action work its way down into the gap between the mount and the bush. Perfect. Now that we've got the axle bushings and the motor in place where we want it, I'm going to use JB Weld, which is a two-part glue like an epoxy. It's steel reinforced, and I'm going to use this on the end of the skewer here, and I'm going to lock that motor in place with this, and it won't be able to move at all. It'll be nice and rigid in the chassis, which is what I'm after. You'll see I've got the JB Weld all the way around the motor mounts on both sides, and just a little bead of it in front of the motor along the chassis as well. Having a look at the interior of the car while we're waiting for some other glue to dry. If you turn it over there, we can see these little pegs here which push down on the axle bushes. Now because we're going to want body float, we don't want these things touching the actual bushes, and it's just extra weight, so I'm going to trim off any of these little parts here, and I might even trim off any other excess that I can see that might help lighten that as well. Now I'm just going to use my Dremel. When it comes to fitting the guide, I'm going to be using the B-Nova adapter, which I've got placed in there at the moment, and this advanced slot guide. Now the back of the guide here goes over the chassis and doesn't go fully into the recess, so you can see where I've marked on there with black marker. I'm going to cut and remove that back end of the guide so that it fits well within the recess. I'm just going to cut this with a saw and trim it down. Now when we fit the guide in, it moves in there without any binding or catching at all. And to hold the guide adapter in place, I'm just going to use a drop of super glue on the bottom of the chassis. So here's the car with the wheels on and the body on. I've put the interior in. I've just done a few laps just to see what it would do. Now at this stage I still haven't trued the tyres, either front or back, and I haven't really done anything apart from just assemble it to test drive it. I managed a 7.02 second lap, so this is an enormous improvement, and this is getting near the Pioneer Camaro as far as drivability, and I haven't really even done all the fine tuning yet, so I'm pretty pleased so far with how everything's going. Having now spent a bit of time with the car on track, I'm aware of a couple of things that are getting in the way of us getting good body flow. One of them is the exhaust. As the body leans, it touches onto the exhaust, and that's stopping it. Another thing is the interior. The interior is designed to fit very low into the car, so when it's assembled into the body, it does really fit right into the chassis here, and that is robbing us of all of our body flow. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the whole bottom of the interior off. I'm going to cut through the bottom of the driver's seats, and I'm going to replace the plastic in the bottom there with a false floor, and then glue the driver and the seat into the false floor. That'll just give us a bit more height off the chassis so the body won't touch and it can float, and hopefully it'll mean I can also trim the body post down a little bit more and get the body just sitting that even a little bit lower for a better centre of gravity. Now we've successfully cut the driver and his seat and the passenger seat out. There's a roll cage we'll have to stick back in as well. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a piece of this plastic card to become a false floor in the bottom of the interior tray, where I'll be able to reattach the driver. I will trim the seat down a little bit so he doesn't hit the roof, and we'll glue it all back together. I've glued that piece of card into the bottom of the interior there now, but just to make sure that we do have free movement, I'm just going to take off the sharp edge on either side of the bottom of that interior tray with my Dremel. Now as you can see, I've got our driver back in now. He's just he's had the bottom of his seat cut off, so he's just sitting directly on top of the card that I've put in there. He's still got his seat back glued onto his back, and I'm going to put some epoxy in there and glue him in. And I'm also going to work on getting the passenger seat in there as well. So here's our finished interior compartment, our driver and the passenger seat all glued back in, roll cages all in, and we've got that false floor on there, so it should make a big difference to our body float. So here's our car. We've got body float. I can hold the chassis there and hold the wheels, and we've got a nice amount of float. We can adjust it by how tightly we do up the screws. I have changed the screws in the car as well. So at the rear I use these NSR screws, and at the front I use these advanced slot screws. I use the advanced slot screws at the front because the holes for the screws are very small due to this bib spoiler. So these screws are all partially threaded, so they don't have threads at the top of the screw to catch on the bodywork, so we still retain our float. Well, here's the car. It's pretty much finished now. It's looking original again. It's got the inserts fitted to the wheels, and the car is fast. Now I've been running a few laps here, and before I treated the tyres, I just gave them a clean with some tape. Now the Camaro and the Challenger here, they ran within 0.01 of a second, so within a hundredth of each other. So they were pretty close, and I did quite a few laps, and they were both running reasonably consistently when I took those times. So they were pretty well on par then. But since I've treated the tyres with a little bit of oil, with NSR tyre treatment oil, this car here ran a 6.72 second lap. And it wasn't an isolated incident. I did do a few other laps that were pretty close at that time, but 6.72 was the best. I'm really pleased with that, and the handling is far better than it was. I've managed to tune down the rollover tendency that it had by putting a little bit of weight either side just in front of the rear wheels. And now it's a pleasure to drive. So, job done. I will keep tinkering with it, of course, over the years, and I'm sure we'll only get better and better still. Thank you very much for watching.